But it wasn't until I did ayahuasca and actually died in my first experience and disintegrated and became eaten by all the maggots and started growing like the grass and had this total rebirth experience as everything, that I had this like spiritual experience firsthand. And I sort of understood a little bit more than I had before. And it blew my mind completely, and I just realized I know absolutely nothing about anything, and I'm curious now, and I want to go deeper on this path. And so that really opened up me to a whole new world of plant medicine. And I think they're a tool. I think psychedelics are not the answer. I think that a lot of people put them on a pedestal as like the answer to all their problems, and it's going to change their life. And I think that for me, that's not a healthy sort of way to sort of view them. I think they're a tool. And I think you need to view them as a tool to help give you more awareness to the things you need to work on within yourself. And sometimes they'll break you out of a pattern or depression and give you some space to now do the work yourself, or give you insights on yourself, or help you to see things in a different way. But it always comes back to you then taking those and integrating into your life, changing a habit, doing things differently, changing your environment.
So my guest today is Giovanni Bartolomeo, also known as Gia, and Gia is actually a friend of mine. He's a fellow biohacker, spiritual seeker, psychonaut, and entrepreneur. And I really like this guy because he's maybe not the most popular person out there, but he has enormous knowledge and wisdom and a lot of experience with many things. So that's why I really wanted to interview him. So he's a certified Wim Hof method instructor, and he shares some of the ideas and the science behind this method, Wim Hof's breathing method, that I've been using myself as well. So he's an extremist, and he actually did 55-day fast, and he talks about benefits and side effects in this interview. Gia has a lot of experience with psychedelics as well, so he actually goes into some of the things, some of the realizations, and we discuss this topic. And this interview is actually in 2 parts, and part 2 is available to our Patreon supporters only. And in part 2, he goes into some of the concepts like ego, how he understands ego. We talked about entrepreneurship and ethics in business, how big corporations operate, why they are unethical in most cases, being in the flow and surrendering yourself to whatever comes and synchronicities in your life. So there is a lot of interesting things there. Again, Gia is an amazing guy. You should check out his documentary Psyched Out, where he interviews some of the biggest names in the psychedelic scene. And now enjoy the show with Giovanni Bartolomeo. So this is Mike Sygula from truththeory.com, and this is Truth Theory Podcast episode 10. And my guest today is Giovanni Bartolomeo. Giovanni is an entrepreneur, life adventurer, passionate about natural health, self-development, spirituality, and plant medicines. He's the director and producer of a documentary called Psyched Out that delves into healing effects of plant medicines such as ayahuasca. He's also the founder of a wellness center called Elemental, located in Toronto, Canada. And Gia is a vlogger and podcast host, and you can check out his YouTube channel called Elemental Awakening. So Gia, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm gonna have to record that snippet. It's probably the best intro, because everyone asks me, what do you do? And it's like, oh, I don't even know where to start. I'm just gonna press play and they can hear your voice. All that stuff and a few other things. And I'm a dad too.
Everything together, you have a lot of stuff going on, and
yeah, I find to try to keep myself busy. It's one of the things I'm working on now is why do I always feel like I need to do so many things? You know, it's one of my recent challenges I've discovered about myself, where every time I take a few things off my plate, somehow or another, something else finds its way onto the to-do list. But anyways, I don't know if you want to get into that or where you want to start today.
Let's say, what's the main thing for you now? Like, you're saying you kind of juggling things.
So the main things that I'm working on right now in my life, like the main focus of the things that are exciting to me, yeah. So the things that are actually in fruition, that are actually happening right now, I would say we have an online school, personal development school I'm a co-founder in, which is really helps people with reprogramming the subconscious mind, identifying some of the things they need to work on in their life and how to sort of fix those. And we launched that. It's just actually the 2nd of October was our 1-year anniversary. And in the first year, we've seen amazing growth and amazing feedback and a lot of changes and learning. So that's where I spend most of my time now. And we also have the studio, which is Elemental Wellness, where we're building like an in-person community, which I felt is also important to actually have physical contact, especially with all this COVID stuff going on at this time. And there's a lot of challenges around that because the government in Ontario looks like they're trying to go for a second wave right now and shutting everything down. So those are the two main things that I'm currently working on. And as part of the wellness studio, we're now certifying breathwork instructors. So one of my backgrounds, I'm a breathwork coach. I actually trained with Wim Hof, and then I started trying all different modalities and learning things and experimenting. And we came up with our own type of experience that we were, I guess, facilitating for people, which we found very transformative. And I wanted to train some of the staff to also facilitate so we can have breathwork classes every night. Because I'm a dad, and although I would love to teach breathwork every night, it's not always feasible. I gotta set my priorities and balance with the family life. And so I trained them all, and then they were able to easily, I won't say easily, but they learned, and their experiences are amazing as well. So it's something that can definitely be taught. And so we're trying to expand that now. So now outside the studio, if people want to learn this, because I feel it's one of the most powerful tools that I can teach to share people to create change. So it looks like that might go into part of an online school as well, where there's going to be breathwork courses where people can use them every day. So those are my main focuses. And the dream, like the big dream that's in the back of my head, which is starting to manifest now, is creating a retreat center. Friend of mine just bought some property down in Costa Rica. We're looking at doing something in Ontario where people can really go to explore themselves mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, where they can move their body, exercise, breath work. We're looking at things like dark retreats, all the things that interest me, to have a little kind of different kind of getaway than just, going somewhere and drinking and restaurant and all those kind of typical norms, a little bit different than the spa. So something that's really allows you to go deep and have different experiences. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
a lot of things here that I want to talk about. Wim Hof's breathing method is something actually I got interested in recently. But first, what's the meaning of elemental awakening? Why you came up with this name in the first place?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Good question. So the name Elemental came from from our wellness studio. So when I was thinking of a wellness studio that I wanted to create a name that I felt was simple to understand and had a lot of meaning to it. Okay. And Elemental has a few different meanings. So Elemental in one way means the elements. So fire, earth, water, and air. And so I really love that because it's very powerful, the forces of nature. And they each symbolize sort of a different type of energy. At the studio, we were going to have like different sort of modalities that sort of would embody each one, like breath work or sauna or floating, sensory deprivation tanks, etc. And then I just love the word awakening because I feel like, the entire earth is in this process of awakening right now. Me on an individual level, and I see the people around me that are going through their stuff, which doesn't necessarily look like just opening your eyes. It's a lot of, just movement of energy and, discomfort in a way, realizations of these uncomfortable truths. But it's a process. And the intention of the podcast and the YouTube channel was to share what I'm going through, some of the insights that I have, and some of the friends that I have, their insights, just to sort of, hopefully land on someone's ears that may be going through a similar process, that may be unsure of what's going on, may not have anyone to talk to in their surroundings. So, yeah, the elemental awakening is a combination of something that's simple and powerful, with the intention to sort of raise consciousness and help people on their journey.
Tell us, what was your process of awakening like? It's like one of my first questions for every guest. I'm always interested in this stuff.
Yeah, so for me it was, I guess it really started maybe like 2000, mid 2000s, and had a very good upbringing, lived in the suburbs in Toronto and had a lot of friends and did well in school. Was a really smart kid. And, after university, I started working, I don't know what happened, but I thought that I was getting sick, and I don't know if it was the media I was watching and something just made me think that I was sick, that I was dying. And for a couple months, I believed it. And when my mind was thinking that, I just felt myself getting sicker, more tired. I was imagining symptoms. I was reading up on the internet, like all these things, and they were making my mind, go into this sort of loop. And I didn't know this at the time, but, the way you feed your mind and the things you believe really has an effect on how you create your reality and the way you feel. So that sort of led me down this conspiracy theory type path where I was looking at like cures for stuff and just going down these crazy rabbit holes. And there wasn't a lot available on the internet at that time, personally. Like, this is probably like pre-Facebook. But there was the internet and people were posting all kinds of crap. So I was just really getting lost in that, which was sort of making it worse than making it better. And it put me into this sort of like place where I felt like I had a choice. It's like you can sort of like fill your mind with all this crap, or you can sort of like focus on like accepting that you're going to die one day and just become more spiritual and start like looking into that sort of path. So that led me down a different path. So I started reading Eastern philosophy. I started, I sort of left the conspiracy stuff aside, realizing that it didn't really matter and didn't really have any really effect on me, whether it was true or not. And even if things were true, I still have to face the same things mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, whether I'm dying or not. And just to have to accept that and just sort of like focus on this path of spirituality. And I didn't even know what that was. I was born Catholic. I went through all like baptism, confirmation, but I never ever had a spiritual connection. I never really understood what that meant. Although I thought the story of Jesus was great and all of, like things I would hear at church, yeah, these are good things, but there's never really any interest or connection. And as I'm going down this path and, like studying more like the Bhagavad Gita, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, I was watching a video online which had Alan Watts. And he was just talking about, I can't remember exactly what he was talking about, but I remember in the comments, one of the comments just jumped off the screen at me. And I talk about this in my documentary. And it was just basically like, if you think Alan Watts is interesting, like Terence McKenna will blow your mind. And I'd never heard this guy's name before. And so immediately I click, into the YouTube search, like Terence McKenna pops up, press play, and just like my awareness was just absorbed into like a tunnel into the computer. It was just like hearing him talk about things, the way he spoke was like nothing I'd ever heard before, and just really sort of got my attention. And that night there, I probably watched like 5 or 6 hours of straight Terence McKenna YouTube videos, just binge watch, sucked me right in. And he was talking a lot about psychedelics, and at that point I never used psychedelics in a conscious way. A few parties here and there with alcohol and smoking marijuana and in very sort of social settings. And something told me I had to try this ayahuasca thing. I'd never heard of it. No one I knew had ever spoken of it. This is probably like 2010 maybe. So I know it's been around for thousands of years, but for me it was a brand new thing. And to my awareness at that point, I couldn't find it. It didn't exist in North America. It was only somewhere in South America. I had to go find it. So I went down there, And I was already starting to practice meditation at the time, so I wasn't really saying I have like any real spiritual experiences, but I was starting to feel this different energy coming on through like just focusing my awareness, reading these things. But it wasn't until I did ayahuasca and actually died in my first experience and disintegrated and became eaten by all the maggots and started growing like the grass and had this total rebirth experience as everything, that I had this like spiritual experience firsthand, and I sort of understood a little bit more than I had before. And it blew my mind completely, and I just realized I know absolutely nothing about anything, and I'm curious now, and I want to go deeper on this path. And so that really opened up me to a whole new world of plant medicine, which led me into, breathwork, Wim Hof, biohacking, all these other things, where I was just constantly sort of just exploring myself and the limits of the human body. I started getting to like some long-term fasting, and different cleanses and meditation, dry fasting. And, like I kept on realizing new things and having a ton more questions of like, I know nothing, but I know a little bit more than I knew yesterday. And that's exciting. So, that was sort of the 10-year process. So there wasn't really an awakening moment. But around the same time, like I guess when I was getting sick, part of that sort of awakening was also realizing that what I was doing meant nothing. I was in sales, I was selling food products, I was doing well, I was making money, I just got married, and I was doing everything right that I was told I was supposed to do as a kid, like buy a nice car, buy a house, make some money, go on vacation twice a year. And I just remember one day I just woke up out of bed and sat at the side of my bed, and I looked at my hands, and I had this vision or a daydream of like just my hands getting old and wrinkly, doing the same thing every day. It's like, you're going to do this for 60 years, and like, who cares? Like, figure out what you're supposed to do in this lifetime, and let's get going here. Like, that was like the thought in my head. Like, you can't do this for the rest of your life. And I had no idea what that meant, what I'm supposed to do. But now I see it was like a little bit of a wake-up call. So I'd say like if there was a moment, it was between that and getting sick, which sparked everything. And, it's interesting because like when I thought I was sick, it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me. And then looking back through my life, every major shift sort of came out of this really challenging experience where something would happen. And then I was forced to sort of reevaluate like who I was and what I was doing. It was always 9 times out of 10 a very challenging experience where I had to just really sort of think like, what the hell is going on in my life right now? Like, and why is this happening to me?
Yeah, it's very often that we have to go through some kind of crisis, and that kind of propels us to look for a different path. And then when you look back a couple of years later, you see that crisis as something that actually benefits you now, like as a gift almost. But when you were saying that you were sick, was it like a depression or lack of happiness?
So I think it started off as that, and that was feeling unfulfilled. Although like there was nothing in my environment that would indicate that I had any reason to be upset or depressed or anything like that. But I think it was just a lack of fulfillment and purpose, which then started bringing my energy down. My sleep levels would go down. Then I started feeling anxious, and then I thought that I had like a serious disease. I didn't know what it was, but the more I would think about being sick, the more I'd feel sick. The more I'd go online and say, can't sleep, insomnia, all of these things come up. You have cancer, you're dying, this and that. Then I would, when you start putting symptoms into Google, it just gives you every worst case scenario. So it just started feeding this perpetual sort of mindset of like fear, like, yeah, you're dying. But it was nothing that I was ever diagnosed with or anything that was a real sort of disease. It just slowly started. I think for some silly reason, my subconscious mind needed something to wake me up and scare me to sort of change. And I think it was just totally self-perpetuating, like self-inflicted fear that needed to get me to move a little bit and sort of change the way I was thinking. So, yeah.
And what was your experience with Wim Hof and his breathing method? I'm pretty curious about it. Recently I've been hearing about Wim Hof for a long time, and somehow, I never actually got into his methods. And a couple of months ago, I started practicing on my own, and I got pretty hooked, quite quickly, because like for example, the breathing method is very powerful. I can see the change literally after like 10 minutes of doing it. Like my mind gets clear straight away, and I don't know many things that work in such a way so quickly, so you almost like you see the benefits straight away. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so popular. It's gaining so much popularity. So I got hooked on it, and now I'm doing it like up to 5 times a day. When I do breaks, when I'm sitting in front of the computer, I need to take a break. I'm just going to do like 10 minutes of breathing. And because I didn't have anyone to work with, so I was just self-taught, watching some stuff on YouTube. So I want to know a little bit of maybe your story. You have a lot more expertise. And also, do you think you can overdo it? Like if I've been doing it, let's say the breathing now for like 5 times a day, 10 minutes more or less, can it become dangerous in some way? And how to progress with it as well, because...
Cool. Yes. Good questions. A lot of good questions. So, where do you want me to start?
Yeah,
with Wim?
maybe you
With
can just
the breathing?
explain to people who might not be familiar, like what is it about, and who is Wim Hof?
Yeah, so Wim Hof is a very special guy, and the thing that I probably like the most about Wim is that he is himself at all times. So aside from the breathing method, the Guinness records, whenever you meet him, he's just like in this zone of Wimness. He's just Wim all the time. He's a little bit wild. He just loves to sort of put himself out there. He's got this energy that sort of just draws you in when he talks, and I'm very grateful and lucky to know him personally. And I met him at a time when I think it was just before he totally blew up. And I used to have these little groups which I used to gather friends together. This was like earlier on, as I was sort of awakening, I'd say, before I had my ayahuasca experience. And or just around that same time. I can't remember exactly, but it was just around the time. Maybe I just had done ayahuasca, and we would get together and we'd watch some videos and like just talk about these interesting things. And one time I was looking for something that was really inspiring and different, and I came across Wim, and I watched, I think, one of his like documentaries, Becoming Superhuman or something like that. And I remember seeing him and just like, wow, who is this guy? And we watched the video, and he's doing all these crazy things. And it really stuck out to me as another thing. He was like, yeah, like anyone can do this. Like that was his thing. It was like, yeah, these are crazy things, but anyone's capable of doing this. And they're doing all those tests, like the E. coli test, where they tested all these people. And I found that fascinating. So I reached out to him. And at the time I was launching my first podcast. But I just reached out, and I sort of just said like, hey, like I was working with a website at the time, and I said, we would love to write a little blog about you, maybe do an interview. And he's like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. So we hopped on a call, and right away I fell in love with this guy. And he's like, yeah, we're doing our first training in California for instructors. You should come. And he invited me to go and become an instructor. And so I went, not knowing much about breathing at the time or cold exposure, living in Canada. And so I started experimenting. And like you said, it was something that immediately you feel a difference. And it was something that was free and everyone had access to. And so I didn't really understand the power of that at the time, but I was curious. And I ended up going, I did that. Then about 5 or 6 months later... funny timing. It was right around the first week-long instructor certification was the week of the U.S. election, when Trump got elected initially. And I remember being there with 30 or so Americans, and everyone's just like, "Oh my God, what's going on? Is he going to win?" And I was just like, "Thank God I don't care about this at all because I'm Canadian." And so we did the whole week, and so my initial reason for going, a lot of it was ego based. I wanted to climb a mountain with Wim Hof in my shorts. I wanted to say I did these crazy things. But over the course of 6 months, I started having these experiences with breathing, how I would feel different. Or, one time I felt myself uncontrollably start crying. And I was like, where did that come from? I hadn't cried in who knows how long. And when we got there, we're doing all these things. We're going in lakes, climbing mountains. It was a lot of fun. But as people started to share their story, I started realizing there's people all different ages, probably from like, 20 to like 60 plus years old. Men, women, different backgrounds, different nationalities, but they'd all been affected in a different way. And also different like financial backgrounds. Some of them are addicts, some of them are professionals, some of them come from high stress environments, some of them were athletic trainers. But all of them had a different story of how this thing changed their life. And sitting there listening, like, wow, this is powerful. Now I'm getting certified. I even really didn't have much of an intention of creating a business or like teaching people. I was just wanted to go for the experience. And I just saw like, wow, this is a very powerful modality that I can share with people. And as I started sharing it after that weekend, it was immediately like evidence, like, wow, like this is something that people need and they're getting a lot out of. And I was getting a lot out of it, both learning and teaching. So that's how I met Wim. We've kept in touch ever since. I ended up bringing him to Toronto. He's supposed to come back this year. Like I don't talk to him a lot. I don't want to make it seem like we're best friends or anything, but we'll message every once in a while. We'll say what's up, and I love what he's doing because he's just like a trailblazer. He believes in what he's doing. He's getting results. He's raising money. So you got to remember, like when they do studies and people that want to invest in these things, like drug companies or the pharmaceutical industry, they have no interest in something like this because it's free. It actually probably makes people healthier, so it's actually a competitor to their profit margins, right? Because the more people take their health into their own hands, obviously they're not going to need as much medication and stuff like that. So it's sort of like pushing against sort of a monster in a way, in that respect. But he's doing it, and people are realizing that the power of taking your health into your own control and what that's going to mean for long term. And I think right now, the whole healthcare industry is shifting with the biohacking and people being more conscious of all these tools and techniques that are at their disposal. So I really support him for that, and I love what he's doing. And for those who don't know him, he's got like 26 Guinness records. He climbed to the death zone in Everest. He's done Kilimanjaro in record time. He sat under ice for a record time. Some of these records have been broken since, but swimming under the ice for the longest distance. You can look him up online. He's got like 26 of them. He's also done some really interesting studies where using his method, they were able to boost the immune system and they get injected with a bacteria. Where they were able to fight it off, and the control group was just getting sick. So some really, really interesting stuff, and I think they're just scratching the surface on where it's going. But then back to your question about breathing daily, and like, yeah, you're absolutely right. That it's something that you can instantly feel a difference, and that's what I love about it. When you share it with someone, it's not like something where it's like, yeah, it might take 3 or 4 weeks to feel something, or it's going to happen gradually over time. It's like, no, if you sit down and breathe. Even if you don't even breathe properly, but you just give it your all, you're going to feel something. And most people feel euphoric, or they feel a sense of clarity, or pain goes away, like all different things for different people. And so my philosophy on breathing is, something like Wim Hof breath or like a pranayama that's very intense. It's like working out. So you don't want to work out 10 times a day. But in small sort of spikes, I don't think it's going to be detrimental to your health in any way. And it has a lot of positive benefits. So the Wim Hof breathing, so what's happening is, so it's making your body alkaline, so it's changing your pH. And it also will help fluctuations in pH. So when you breathe and you have a lot of oxygen, you go a little more alkaline. When you hold your breath, it raises your carbon dioxide levels, so you're going to go a little bit more acidic. Those fluctuations actually decouple pain receptors in your body, so you feel less pain based on the fluctuation of up and down pH. They found that lasts for up to 24 hours. Other things, they say like when you change your pH and you raise it, there's some controversy around this, but they say, cancer can survive in that environment. I think it is somewhat true, and these are just my own beliefs anyways. I think that the body's always going to maintain a certain pH level, because if it doesn't, you're going to die. Between, I think it's 7.2 to 7.6. But, your environment, the stress is going to make you work harder to maintain that. So if you're eating shitty processed foods, you're going to be more acidic. If you're doing all these different things, you're going to be more acidic. And then what happens is, as a response to an acidic environment, whether it's stress or food, your body's going to want to breathe at a higher rate to balance that. And that breathing at the higher rate is not good for you when you're breathing too much. It puts you to fight or flight, stresses your nervous system. It does a lot of things. And chronic hyperventilation, if you look at a list of the symptoms, basically, it leads to all kinds of sort of health disorders and chronic diseases, or it's associated with a correlation to them. So when you ask me if you should do it all the time, I would say it's fine, like doing it 4 or 5 times a day for a quick reset, but you want to make sure that you normalize your breathing everywhere else. So whenever you're not doing the exercise, you're breathing slowly through your nose into your diaphragm. And you want to reduce your breathing rate as much as possible. And there's a new book by James Nestor called Breathe that I highly recommend. It's really good. Or The Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen. Patrick studied with Vladimir Buteyko, and he was a Russian scientist who really pioneered a lot of the opposite types of breathing techniques, which was normalizing or reduced breathing to increase health. And what the theory is it just increasing your carbon dioxide level. It's a vasodilator, increases circulation, it helps your body function in a way different way. And there's also something called the Bohr effect that sort of supports that claim. But basically, in a nutshell, without getting too much into the science, when you overbreathe, you're expelling too much carbon dioxide, and the hemoglobin and the red blood cells is going to hold on to oxygen. Okay? So it means that your blood has a lot of oxygen, but it's not able to sort of disperse it into your tissues and cells. What actually does that is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not a waste gas. The actual carbon dioxide takes the oxygen and delivers it to your body so you can perform at a high level. So if you're always expelling all this CO2, you have a very low CO2 tolerance, and so you can only bring so much. So you start actually going more into anaerobic. Although you have all this oxygen holding on by the blood cells, it's not getting delivered into your tissues. So they found that by holding your breath more, by working on bringing yourself and raising your CO2 tolerance, it allows you to perform better. You have better sort of energy levels, better ability to deal with stress, and all these things start happening. And so where that sort of overlaps the Wim Hof method, which is interesting, because I try to find like, hey, how can these be such opposing sort of philosophies, but they both do the same thing, because they both help heal asthma. So, one philosophy is if you start getting asthma attack, you should actually hold your breath rather than try to breathe more. Because when you hold your breath, it raises your carbon dioxide. It actually helps to sort of vasodilate and sort of relieve inflammation. In the Wim Hof method, you're doing all this heavy breathing, 30, 40 breaths. Then what do? You take a breath in, you exhale fully, and then you hold. So as you're doing the 30 breaths, what are you doing? You're breathing out all this carbon dioxide. So your carbon dioxide level is actually lowering. The thing that actually triggers you to breathe is your carbon dioxide level and not your oxygen. So most people think, 1, carbon dioxide is a waste gas, and 2, when I run out of air, I'm going to need to breathe. But that's not the case. It's not when you run out of oxygen. It's when your carbon dioxide level reaches a certain point, it triggers that breathing reflex. So imagine you're doing 30 breaths in a round. So your carbon dioxide level is going really low. Your oxygen level is always going to stay up here. Every breath in you take, your oxygen goes pretty much back to 100. And then you hold. So now it's going to take so much longer for your carbon dioxide level to hit that point where you need to breathe. But also, because it's taking you longer, you go into a hypoxic state. So very low oxygen. So it's training your body to deal with low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. And that's good sort of to train it. And both states have different effects. So high CO2 and low oxygen will have different effects on the body when you train it. It's amazing for stimulating stem cells, for circulation, creating new sort of cardiovascular pathways. It creates new like blood vessels. And there's like a huge list for both. But that's sort of where they overlap. It's like, I can see like how this is really good and how that method is good as well. And I sort of went on a total tangent there. I hope that made sense, but I tried to explain it the most simplest way for the podcast.
One thing that it's also interesting to me, why do you actually, when you do 30 breaths, for example, the first thing after you exhale and you hold, and you hold much longer than the second thing what you do, you inhale for 15 seconds afterwards. So it's all about like first after 30 breaths you exhale and you hold maybe 1 minute, maybe a minute and a half, and then when you inhale you hold, but you hold only for 15 seconds. Why this is the way it's organized?
Like this is his method, but typically every breath you take in, it's going to bring your oxygen level back to somewhere between 96 to 100. It just takes one breath to get you back up there. And what's happening is, when you're doing the hold, you're bringing your CO2 level all the way up. So as soon as you breathe in, you have all this carbon dioxide ready to bring the oxygen to the cell. So all it really takes is that one breath to sort of, reset the whole system, flood it with oxygen, and then you can start the next round. because your carbon dioxide level and your oxygen went really low, your CO2 is really high. That reset doesn't take that much long, because when you breathe in a deep breath, immediately it's like sends it into the system. So I think that's just the way they designed the method. You could probably do another hold on the top if you wanted to, all the way in and hold for as long as you could. That could be interesting as well. And you gotta remember, like, there are hundreds of breathing techniques, especially now. Everyone has their own breathing technique. You know, you go on the app store. There's 1,000 breathing apps, and everyone's got, you know, all these things, and they all really come from pranayama, which is Vedic, you know, yoga philosophy. And they branched off from there, went into the East, into the Buddhist and Tumo and stuff like that. And they have a lot of similarities. And, you know, now in the West, you have everyone's making up every single breathwork, but it all really comes from that. And it's, you know, no matter how you cut it, they're doing similar things based on the way, the pace, the way you hold your breath as well.
Hey guys, Mike here. Just a quick note. As some of you know, currently on the web there are some serious attempts to censor the information that do not fit the mainstream narrative. And we at Truth Theory have experienced that firsthand. We have been shadow banned, we have been demonetized, we even lost some of our accounts. So now more than ever, we need support from our followers and people like you. So we accept donations. If you want to help us out, just go to truthfear.com/donate, and anything helps. We also accept cryptocurrencies, and we've been creating free content for the last 10 years, and our goal was always to just expand consciousness of humanity and raise awareness about important things. But it's becoming increasingly harder to do so. So any support helps, and you know, thanks a lot for supporting us. And if you cannot help financially, that's not a problem. Maybe you can share our content on social media, share it with your friends. That always helps. And we are on all major platforms, so make sure you subscribe as well. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Just search for Truth Theory or Truth Theory Podcast, and make sure you follow us or subscribe. And again, if you want to support us, just go to truththeory.com/donate. And now back to the show. Yeah, it's also interesting that you don't hear much about actually chi or prana, because like one thing is what happens on a biological level, and the other thing with oxygen and carbon dioxide, but the other thing is also with absorbing chi, because breathing is also linked to that. You know, you have meridians and I'm actually sensitive to this stuff, so I can feel that when I'm doing the breathing methods. I can sense how I'm, you know, my left hand is tingling, for example, when I do like intense breathing and all these kind of things. But yeah, this is actually another part of like all these methods, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's been thousands of years they've been talking about, if you look at any philosophy, they always talk about the importance of breath. Whether it's Christianity, whether it's, you know, the Vedic text, whether it's Buddhism, you'll find a bunch of you know, proverbs or sayings that all say like the importance of the breath, the importance of nose breathing, like all these things. And the yogis actually would study animals, and they realized, back to the other question about breathing too much, the animals that breathe the slowest usually live the longest, and the ones that breathe the quickest have the shortest lifespan. So right there it tells you, you know, it's really important to slow down your breath. It helps you to relax. You just feel calm, and you're not in that stress state that when you're breathing quickly, it's like you're always fight or flight, ready to go at any time. Yeah. So the first thing anyone should do is just focus on how you're breathing. Set a reminder in your phone 3 or 4 times a day. Check in with your breath. I think breath awareness is the most important out of all these things. All different practice, what are they doing? They're all focusing on your breathing and have some awareness to your breath. It brings you back to the center.
I noticed also after meditating for many years that I can get into a very slow breathing pace. You know, when I meditate, it's just almost like you don't need to breathe sometimes. You know, it just can get very slow. And I know you've been experimenting with with fasting as well. Like we had this story we published on our website actually, talking about your 55-day fast. And, I want to know a little bit about that. Like, what were the results, preparation, positive and negative side effects? Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, that was a really interesting time in my life. I'd launched the first podcast, and at the time also I was like, yeah, I want to get more followers. I want, to get this message out to more people. A little bit was ego based, and like it was hard. It was hard to sort of grow at that time, especially, this was after sort of, Facebook started changing their algorithm, so it wasn't growing at the same rate that's, I'd seen some people that have this explosive growth before, and I was in my head a lot about it. And the thing that always would come to me in meditation is just do you. Like, stop worrying about the outside world and focusing on that. Just focus on yourself. Keep doing your work. All that stuff doesn't matter. It's one thing to say that to yourself. It's another thing to actually catch yourself in these patterns of, wanting to grow and wanting to succeed and wanting to be seen and heard. So, I had been hearing about fasting, and I've been hearing about longer term fasting, and my wife actually was, someone added her to some Facebook group where there was a group of people, my friend Gino, who's a friend now, he wasn't a friend at the time, who actually ended up living pretty much a few kilometers from me. But anyways, I was put in this Facebook group. I didn't know who ran it, what they were doing, but they were doing these crazy long fasts for up to some of them up to 108 days. And a lot of them were having these crazy transformations, from anything from their eyes changing color to healing from cancer. One guy was paralyzed and started walking again, and it was just the craziest shit. And so she's telling me these stories, and they're taking pictures of their crap, and their eyes are changing color. She's like, you gotta see this, or you gotta see some of the people looked super anorexic, they were dying. And I was like, I don't want to see that shit. And and one day she just I just looked, and again, there's certain things that happen to me where my attention and curiosity just really starts going off, like the alarm signals are going off, and I started just feeling this pull to hey, there's something here for you. So I looked into it. I looked up their protocol and what they were doing, and I ended up reaching out to the guy who started it, based on his own healing journey. And ends up he lives down the street, literally, he's from the same place where I grew up. So I'm going to meet up with him, and he starts telling me about what he was doing. And I've always been an extremist, so I said, I can give this a shot. And so it was at the time they were doing a 108-day fast, so you had to commit to that. They said the minimum you should do is 40, which is also crazy. But they've changed it. Yeah, I'll tell you what the protocol was. So nowadays they've changed it. You can start with a hybrid and work your way up. But basically, so it was intermittent grape juice fasting, which meant you would drink grape juice, which has a very cleansing effect to it just by itself. If you just want to drink Concord purple grape juice for 3 days, it'll clean out your whole system. So you would intermittent drink the juice. So in a 6 or 8 hour window, you drink just juice, and then outside that was dry fasting. And every few weeks you'd do an extended dry fast. So you start with 24 hours dry fast. So dry fast is no food or no water. And there's some interesting sort of research that's coming out and saying how dry fasting, it's kind of intense. I wouldn't really recommend anyone to start with dry fasting. But they're saying a week dry fast, you can get the benefits of a 1 week water fast is almost 1 or 2 days of dry fasting. It's amplifies the effects, and the effects it has on stem cell regeneration. And one of the original things when I was starting down this path, I remembered when I was reading all the philosophic text, all of these great sages, they did these long-term fasts and had these crazy connection and downloads. So I was like, okay, that was the main sort of lure for me. I want to see what happens to my mind and the way I think and feel. So you drink the grape juice, and they had psyllium husk. You take it with some grape juice, which was 0 calories, but it was just a fiber to help you continue going to the bathroom. And a few tinctures that were helping the detox process. So just some tinctures you'd add into a tea once a day. It was a kidney filtering tea. But that was it. And that went on, for me, it was about 60 days. And the longest I had done a dry fast for was 5 days. So I did 5 days with no food or water. And as the fast went on, I was losing a lot of weight. So I went from about 190 to the end of it. I was about like around 140 pounds. And I hadn't been 140 pounds since I was probably like grade 9, the ninth grade. So like 13, 14 years old. It was interesting though, because when I looked at myself in the mirror, although I was super skinny, I didn't feel like I looked that way. It was only looking back, I was like, holy shit, like I looked like I was like dying. And my family, my wife was like, the reason I stopped, because I'm really hard-headed. Once I start something, I usually like finish it. She was like, you have to stop. You look, you're gonna die. Everyone thinks you're sick and you're dying of cancer or something like that. Like, you have to stop. And so I stopped, and it was pretty crazy because, you know, the first week was challenging. But the actual physical cravings sort of subside after about 5 to 7 days. So you don't really crave food as much anymore. You just get into this like state. Your senses are heightened like crazy. I could smell like what people were cooking down the street for dinner. And that's sort of a natural sort of like technique. If you were a hunter-gatherer and you were hungry, it improves your eyesight. It makes you sort of think clearly. Your senses are heightened so you can find food. And my ability to do work was crazy. And not everyone has the same experience as I did, but I was super focused, super clear. Like, decision making was no problem. My intuition was like, I could easily sort of look into things if I had an issue and what the answer was. 100%. But I was drinking grape juice, so like theoretically, like I would breaking ketosis. But because I wasn't really adding any food, maybe I was just easily switching back into it as soon as, like, you know, I think they say you have to go like 2 or 3 days without any sugar to enter ketosis. But I just felt super sharp, super clear, so much energy. I was sleeping maybe like 5 hours a night, waking up fully ready to go. I could work 10, 12 hours a day, whether it's on the computer, no matter. And I had all this energy. It was like, even after like 40 days, I was still playing squash. I'd feel lightheaded at times when I was just overdoing it, but like I had the energy to do it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep pushing it. I was doing saunas, I was doing like sweat lodge ceremonies, and like all the recommendations say like don't do any of this stuff when you're fasting. But I was listening to my body. I was super in tune. I was just like, okay, like I'll give this a shot and see what happens. Yeah, and I was able to meditate at a different level. It was just interesting. Like everything started to change, and I was organizing like closets in my house, and like my computer, I cleared out all the files. Like, just my environment had to be super clear and clean, where before I felt like I had all this baggage. I wanted to become more of a minimalist. I got rid of a lot of like extra junk that I had lying around. So it was like this really amazing like internal cleanse and external. And going back to sort of, again, like what I was talking about at the beginning, I ended up writing this article about my experience. And I just wrote it without any intention of just wanting to share. And just being authentic and sharing what I went through. And I shared that on that website I was working with at the time. And within 2 days, I had like 4,000 new friend requests. And the article went super viral all over the internet. And I had, now all these people wanted to like listen to the podcast. It was like this crazy thing where it's like, just be yourself and do you, and don't worry about, like, just be as authentic as you can. People who need to reach you will. And so now I met all these new friends from all over the world who are interested in fasting, want to hear about this story. And it was just an incredible experience. And a week later, I broke my fast. I ate a papaya. It was like the craziest experience. Like, after you fast for a while, the experience of eating food is so different. First of all, you're so much more grateful to have food. The texture, the taste, the smell, like you actually like really pay attention to each bite as it goes down. It was a wild experience. And now I just do a lot more intermittent fasting. I'll do like some, like every quarter, I'll do like a 2 or 3 day dry fast. I don't see the value in pushing myself that far ever again, but like my blood sugar level is like super stable. I got like a continuous glucose monitor. Like a lot of people in the biohacking would just test their glucose levels. So they have these 14-day monitors, and you eat just normally and see what spikes. And I couldn't even get it to spike. I was trying to like drink like maple syrup or like eating like shitty food to try and see how it would affect me. But I think the long-term fast plus all these other fasts really allowed my blood sugar levels to be like amazingly solid and not fluctuate. Yeah, the negative side effects was social. So it was very difficult to be in a social setting because I realized how much of our social life revolves around food. Whether it's holidays, whether it's going out with friends, and then just feeling like an outcast when you're there. You can't eat anything, so you're sitting there, everyone's ordering, eating, sharing food, and you're just sitting there, not eating, having a little bit of grape juice. So that was one. Again, like a lot of people have told me as I was going into it that there's like this crazy detox symptoms and you're gonna feel like shit. I never felt any of that, luckily. And just like losing all the weight, you just look really skinny. Towards the end, I obviously wasn't as strong as I was before, but my body felt great. I never felt like that. Like I guess I had like very, very low inflammation. I went to get a blood test probably about the 50-day mark, because my wife was like, just go to the doctor and just do some blood work at least, see what's going on. And all the markers were 100% healthy. It was like super like perfect on everything, except the only thing they said is they found a little bit of ketones in my urine, which I figured would be the case because, I was probably in and out of ketosis most of that, 50 days. But yeah, like I couldn't really find any major sort of setbacks. The other thing people really got to be careful is introducing food again. So I had like a plan to sort of reintroduce food slowly into my diet. That's, like after the war, World War II, even I think World War One, when they went into these slave camps, or they'd find like prisoners of war. They obviously at the end of the war, when people lose a war, their first priority is not to make sure the prisoners are fed. They're probably trying to, defend for their lives. So people were left there starving, and they found them, and what they did was they fed them, and they fed them right away, and most of them died because their body couldn't digest the food because they hadn't eaten so long. They gave them things like meat and potatoes, and it just blocked their whole intestines, and ended up dying. Sadly, imagine that, surviving a war and dying because you're eating. It's a crazy scenario. So it's really, really important to reintroduce food slowly. So I started with some juice, some soups, papaya, and, over a couple of days. But the whole transition was great. It was an amazing experience. I learned a lot about myself. Probably wouldn't do that extreme again. But we'll see. Who knows?
And did you go for any preparation before that? Like, that was like you jumped straight away into like this crazy long fast?
Yeah, so I had done a few short fasts in the past. I'd done like a bunch of like 1-day fasts. I'd done a bunch of 3-day juice fasts, and I'd done one 7-day juice fast before this with different types of juice. So, when you go to like the juice bar, they give you like a whole week of juice. And then I'd done, those were the 3-day ones, and I'd done one 7-day one at home where I was just blending my own fruit juices. So I had some experience, but, nothing anywhere close to this. It was a big jump to go from 7 days to, I think it was like 58 days by the time I actually finished.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sounds
That's
pretty crazy to me. Like, I don't know, one of the things I think one time I tried to do fasting for a day and it wasn't easy. I don't like to lose body weight as well. That's something to think about, but everyone talks about it, so I guess at some point you gotta try. And I think the worst is the beginning, right?
Yeah, the first 3 or 4 days the hardest. And you start realizing very quickly how addicted you are to food, how your mind. So it took me about 3 weeks to stop thinking about food. So it took me 1 week to stop craving. It took me to the 3rd week, everything I was thinking about was food. You smell food. What am I going to eat next? I wonder what that tastes like. It's lunchtime. What's the first thing I'm going to have for lunch when I break this thing? It was just the mind was just thinking about food. And it took a couple weeks for that to go away. So I just realized how addicted we are to food and how we use it to sort of numb ourselves. Like a lot of people eat because it just numbs your feelings. So that was super interesting as well. But yeah, I was going to say something else, but I forgot.
So I want to talk about your psychedelic experiences as well. You created this documentary called Psyched Out. You interviewed some of the biggest names in this scene. So, how many times have you tried entheogens, and what were like some of the biggest experiences?
Yeah, good question. So I've done a lot. In my opinion, it's a lot. Compared to some other people, it's nothing. And compared to some people, it's a crazy amount. And a lot, I mean, like frequency. And people ask, like, you've done ayahuasca. Aren't you healed? Like, how much more do you have to do? Like, are you addicted? And I don't think you get addicted to psychedelics. Some people do definitely use it as an escape. And maybe I put myself in there. I guess it's, if you're an addict, your first step is denial. But I really don't think that's the case at all. I don't feel the need to want to always go back. Like, I really sort of wait and feel into when it's a good time. I've probably done ayahuasca about somewhere around 50 times, 40 to 50 times. I've done ayahuasca ceremonies. 5-MeO, mushrooms, iboga, LSD, MDMA, ketamine. So I've tried all of these, experimented with them in a much more conscious way than what I'd previously done, just maybe like psilocybin growing up, more in a party setting. But since I sort of had this new sort of realization, a lot of the time, like almost 95% were in a ceremonial setting. Some of them were done like just out of nature, which is also for me I consider in a ceremony, although it's not an actual traditional ceremonial setting. And like some of these newer compounds, there's not really much of a tradition or lineage to it, but I always try to bring it with some intention, a good set and setting, people that I trust and care about, or someone that I can trust that's watching over me. So when it comes to experiences, like I don't know where to even begin. Like some of the most profound, crazy, life-changing experiences, and a lot of times the question comes up: it's like, is this a real experience, or is this something my mind's creating to create the most impactful realization that's going to shift my consciousness? So as a plant that's smart, that's saying like, hey, based on all the things you've experienced in your life, this experience is going to give you this. Whether it's a scary experience, whether it's a challenging experience, whether it's a joyful experience, it's using, what's I'm going to sort of interpret as powerful. And I think that's interesting because, are you tapping into another world or a different dimension? Someone who's never heard of Jesus or some of these Buddhist gods are never going to see them because it's not in their consciousness. And I don't think that means that they're not connected there. I just think it means it wouldn't mean anything if they saw it. You know what I mean? They wouldn't have that sort of effect on them. And I think the psychedelics are very smart in that way. So I've connected with my dead grandfather who passed away when I was 1 and had like this whole childhood experience with him. I've died, like I mentioned earlier, and come back to life. I've seen past lives, or what I can only interpret as past lives, which gave me a lot of insight into why I, was a prepper at one time, worried about the end of the world because I'd lived through a catastrophe. That's what it showed me in my past life. Also, why my kids are afraid to be alone and have all this fear, because they were part of that catastrophe as well. So they always want to be by my side. Just sort of showing me all these things. Now, is it true or not? I'm not sure. But I think what it does is, for sure, is those insights or realizations help you to lead a better life now. So seeing that, it was like changing my perspective about how to be a better parent, or how to like let go of, worrying about things that may happen because it doesn't matter. And I'm back here again and I'm having this experience and we don't really know what's next, but it helped me to sort of see beyond death and look at it in a different light as well. And every time there's a different insight or experience, no matter what the medicine is. It's always something new. Sometimes it's very subtle and something you sort of need to sit with for a while and integrate. And sometimes it's just like right in your face, like, hey, you need to do this, or you no longer need to worry about this, or very, very obvious truths that smack you kind of in the face that can be, physically challenging or emotionally difficult to sort of process. But most of the time, looking back, is exactly what you need. So people ask me like my favorite. Like I have a really good connection with mushrooms. I think because they're accessible and they're also much more sustainable than like ayahuasca and stuff like that. So I feel like that's one that I really connect with. And the thing I like about the mushrooms is that there's no real known toxicity. And something that I've recently got into, and I have a recent podcast with Kyle Kingsbury where he shares his 30-gram mushroom experience. And there's a guy called Kalindi Ii, who sadly passed away this year, who was the first guy that I heard speak about these high-dose psilocybin experiences where he'd go like 20, 25, working your way up to these really, really intense experiences. So the most I've done was 16 grams. And, it's right up there with ayahuasca as far as intensity of experience. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same. There's a lot of differences. But it's up there, very profound, very deep. I saw like the inner workings of my mind and myself observing the thoughts and going into this loop of who's observing what and what's observing who. Saw myself die and realize, how this concept of death is very sort of limiting and it's not really truth in any way. And I saw how throughout time, like my consciousness lives beyond this physical body. It was a really, really amazing sort of experience, and how not to worry about little things. Your mind finds these little things to worry about, but it's not important. So that was the psilocybin high dose. Ayahuasca, like I mentioned before, all these crazy experiences. And I also really found an affinity for 5-MeO DMT. I've only done it a handful of times because I haven't felt the need to do more. It's just one of those experiences. I feel it's so transformative and so deep, where you sort of dissolve your consciousness in a way, and you merge with this like light and this crazy high vibrational energy. And there's this sense of like, I don't know how to explain it, but like going home, just being where you need to be. It's like this super high vibration, which is beyond conscious thought in many ways. And a lot of people are sharing their stories about 5-MeO. I think Mike Tyson's one who recently, in the last couple of years, tried it. If you hear him talk before and after that experience, it's a totally different person. And I think they're a tool. I think psychedelics are not the answer. I think that a lot of people put them on a pedestal as like the answer to all their problems, and it's going to change their life. And I think that for me, that's not a healthy sort of way to sort of view them. I think they're a tool. And I think you need to view them as a tool to help give you more awareness to the things you need to work on within yourself. And sometimes they'll break you out of a pattern or a depression and give you some space to now do the work yourself, or give you insights on yourself, or help you to see things in a different way. But it always comes back to you then taking those and integrating into your life, changing a habit, doing things differently, changing your environment. And if you don't, over time, you go back to the same environment, same mindset, the same energy and people around you, you're going to go back to that same pattern. You're just going to regress eventually, maybe in a month, maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year. But that's why I see a lot of people that just keep going to the escape. I hate my job, I hate my life, blah, 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 eating shitty foods. They go do ayahuasca, they feel amazing for a week. Next week, they start feeling a little bit down. A month later, because they come back to their environment, they don't make any changes, right? So I see it as a tool, but I think at the center of all of these things, breathwork, meditation, fasting, ayahuasca, psychedelics, you are the answer. You are the ceremony. You are the most important factor in all of this. And you got to use these things as tools. Each one's going to give you a little bit of different information, a little bit different experience, a little different learning. And now you integrate that into you, and not putting any one of these things as the answer. These are all tools for evolving yourself, your consciousness, your physical body.
Yeah. I mean, they can give you the answers. They can set you up for life, but then you have to do the work afterwards. You got to continue to be in the state afterwards, which the real work starts after the trip, right? But also, I think that we hear a lot of positive stories about psychedelics, especially in recent years. But I'm curious if you ever had like some really dark, bad trips, something that would, maybe have some negative consequences. Like I actually remember I had a friend, when I was much younger, I think we were like 18, and he would take a lot of mushrooms at that time, quite regularly. And I remember he completely lost his mind. Like, I would not see him for 6 months, and then he would just, come around with like massive hair and, talking like we would not see each other for 2 days or something. So I guess because, he was young, like he was 18, so maybe his kind of personality was not developed fully, and he was going with, too high doses or something. Maybe that was the thing, because I don't remember a lot of similar stories afterwards, but I think it's important for people to remember that these are powerful substances, and it's same like you're gonna drive a car. If you don't know how to drive a car, you have no training, you're probably gonna crash.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And I would say, like, there's some situations where things happen just the way they're supposed to happen, where someone with no experience will get into a psychedelic experience and it'll change your life. And a lot of times people are very desperate, or like I've seen a lot of like people who are drug addicts that would do ayahuasca like straight off, never done anything. I'd recommend though, like working your way into it, maybe doing some meditation, breath work, maybe a low dose of like MDMA or psilocybin, and work your way up to like these higher doses. And there's certain people who have mental health issues that are sort of can be susceptible to certain things like schizophrenia or like having psychotic breaks. I think, it's not the psychedelic that sort of did it. It's more like it was going to happen. It just sort of like accelerated. That's my own personal opinion. And I think a lot of the times that when people use these in a non-responsible way, so they don't have a good environment, they don't have people that are there to sort of help them, a lot of times the cases like your friend, I would love to ask, like, what was your childhood like? Did you experience a lot of trauma? Were you not loved? And then like this was an escape that went too far and you didn't know how to integrate it. There wasn't a good support system around. There could be 1,000 variables. I think relatively overall, when you look at the literature, they're very safe. And these cases are very rare. But when they do happen, they get a lot of media attention. Because a lot of people are waiting for like these things to say like, oh, wait a minute, like this is bad because, like look what happened to this person. But when you weigh that against like all of the amazing transformation, I think it's very clear, like these are relatively safe. And we have to sort of make sure that we sort of let people know, like, listen, there's safer ways to do this. It's better to do it in a safe way. And I think the whole legality around it is what makes it challenging, because people are afraid to sort of look for help in these things because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. But a lot of people are going to them out of desperation or from an escape, it sounds like in some cases. So I definitely recommend to people do your own research, talk to, healthcare practitioner, find someone that's safe, that can sort of help guide you, that has experience to give you tips. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone other than sharing my own experiences. So it's a very sort of touchy subject now because of legality. But in my own experience, I've had very challenging trips. I've had like when you die or when you lose touch with reality, it can be scary. And I've been with people that have totally lost their mind completely. Like I've seen that happen. But I think it always gives you exactly what you need. Okay, and I think sometimes these things are there to sort of really shake you. Sometimes we have these very rigid sort of views of reality. And the only thing that's going to impact us on a level that sort of will change us is something that sort of rocks us completely. So I don't really like to call anything a bad trip. I think it's intended to be that way, to sort of help you to change and help you to sort of grow. And it's important that when you have those intense experiences, you have a very strong support network to help you integrate it and to make sense of it. And maybe not make sense of it like explain what happened, but just be there to support you as you sort of make more sense of it. I've seen some people that have very strong minds, very controlling, have these experiences, and it's so challenging because they have trouble letting go. They don't want to let go. They don't want to lose control. Maybe because something that happened to them in childhood. Maybe it's there because losing control meant being unsafe, getting hurt, or being traumatized. So they never want to lose that. Their mind is, I'm never going to let that happen again. And now, in order to heal and move forward, you gotta sort of let go of that. And the psychedelics trying to like pull, and you're pulling back. And I've seen those go on where people feel like they're in hell for like 10 hours or 6 hours. It can be very challenging, but I think they're always there to sort of show you and teach you. Even the bad experiences are the ones that you learn the most of, just like in life. The most difficult psychedelic experiences were the ones I got the most out of in the long run, when I actually sat down and realized what it was trying to show me about myself. Usually it's a reflection of yourself or something that's going on inside your mind. And sometimes it's just healing you on a level that you can't even comprehend. One of my teachers in ayahuasca says sometimes when you can't understand it, it's because it'd be too painful to understand what's going on right now, what the change is happening inside of you. It could be something from a past life, or something that's just deep within your ancestral trauma that needs to be healed. And if you saw it or felt it, it would be too painful. So you don't have any of that experience. That's their interpretation or how they explain it.
Sometimes,
I don't know.
There can be like things going on that you cannot even comprehend, that these plants can help you to work on. And because it's something that you cannot maybe see clearly, it might seem like you're having some crazy, overwhelming experience, but there is a higher intelligence that is actually trying to help you in a way that maybe you don't understand even, but it knows exactly what you need.
It knows exactly, and that's a good point, because people go with these intentions and they're so clear, like I want this, I want that, I need to know who I'm supposed to marry, like all these like crazy intentions. And I tell people, like, it's good to have intentions, it's good to be intentional with everything you do in your life, but the medicine's going to give you what you need over what you want. So if you really want clarity on this, but you really need something else, you're going to get what you really need first, because it's going to heal in order of importance, in my opinion.
Hey guys, Mike here. Just a quick note. I'm currently offering one-to-one mentoring and coaching through our Patreon page. So as some of you know, I've been interested in personal development for 15 to 17 years, and during this time I really spent enormous amounts of energy into researching and practicing different techniques. So I'm offering one-to-one video calls through Patreon, and this is really affordable as well. So some of the things that I can help with are to do with starting an online business, building personal brand, increasing happiness, improving mental and physical health, stress reduction, building confidence and self-esteem, finding your passion, discovering your life purpose, spiritual development and going through spiritual awakening, and many other things. So check it out. It's patreon.com/Truth Theory. It's patreon.com/Truth Theory.